Suddenly, the Morning Star felt alive again. The wheel began to spin under the touch of ghostly hands. The tattered sails filled with a phantom wind that smelled of old graves. We were passengers on our own vessel, ghosts in our own lives. The Spectral crew worked with a terrifying, silent efficiency. They were preparing for a journey we weren't meant to survive. The ship groaned, a deep, rhythmic sound like a heartbeat returning to a corpse. We were heading toward the eye of the abyss, a place where the maps end and the nightmares begin. The crimson water began to boil around us, and the ship started to tilt. They didn't climb the nets like men, they glided through the wood as if it were smoke. The deck became a stage for the damned. Our former brothers, their eyes hollow pits of emerald light, took their places at the silent cannons. They manned the lines with spectral hands that made no sound. We reached for our pistols, but the lead passed through them like a breath of winter air. The captain stood on the quarterdeck, face to face with a first mate he had buried at sea. No words were spoken, but the air grew so cold our breath turned to ice. This wasn't a mutiny, it was a reclamation. The sea was taking back what it had paid for in blood. The sun didn't rise on the fifth day. Instead, the ocean began to bleed. A faint, sickly crimson glow started to pulse from beneath the keel, turning the black water into a pool of wine and salt. The smell hit us next, not the clean scent of the sea, but something metallic, ancient, and cold. The Morning Star was no longer drifting. She was being summoned. Looking over the side, we saw them. Translucent, broken shapes rising from the depths, the fallen. The men we threw overboard, they were climbing back up, their translucent fingers leaving frost on the hull. The crimson tide was calling its children home. Only a handful of us remained, gritty, salt-stained men clutching rusted steel as if it could protect us from the void. We stared at the horizon until our eyes bled, praying for a sail, a bird, anything to prove the world still existed beyond this fog. But hope is a dangerous thing on a dying ship. It rots faster than the meat in the hold. We started hearing it then, the first whispers. Not from the wind, for there was none. No, the voices were coming from the wood. The very oak of the Morning Star began to sigh, a low, mournful groan that vibrated through the solace of our boots. The ship was talking to us, and it wasn't a friendly conversation. The tide is rising again. I can feel the salt in my lungs, and the emerald light calling from the dark. Our journey through the Morning Star is over, but the sea is wide, and its secrets are many. Don't be fooled by the calm. The ocean is always hungry, and it always gets its due. This is the wrecked pirate, fading back into the mist. Keep your eyes on the horizon, but never forget what lies beneath. Until the next wreck, until the next story. May the fog protect you, signing off from the deep. Years will pass, the name Morning Star will be scrubbed from the ledgers of men. But on the nights when the fog rolls in thick and the sea turns unnaturally calm, sailors will still feel a chill in their bones. They will hear a bell ringing from the depths, a clear, ghostly chime that warns of the crimson tide. They will talk of the wrecked pirate, the one who saw the abyss and lived to tell the tale. But did I really live? Or am I just another echo in the wood, a shadow trapped in the grain of a story that never ends? The ocean doesn't just take your life, it takes your legacy. The ship settled on the rocks with a final, echoing thud. The silt rose like a cloud of gray dust, then settled back into silence. The Morning Star now stood as a cathedral of bone and wood. Bioluminescent fish darted through her gun ports, their cold light reflecting off the cursed gold. The Spectral crew remained, their task eternal. They would man these guns until the stars went out, guarding a treasure that no living hand would ever touch again. The crimson water above turned to a deep, oppressive blue. The surface was 1,000,000 miles away, a dream we had long since forgotten. But we weren't alone in the dark. As the light from the surface faded into nothingness, a shadow larger than the ship itself moved beneath us. A colossal, ancient eye opened in the silt, a luminous orb that watched our descent with cold indifference. The kraken wasn't a monster of the storm, it was the gardener of this graveyard. Its massive tentacles, encrusted with the ankles of 1,000 wrecks, reached out to steady the morning star as she touched the seabed. It didn't destroy us, it welcomed us. We were the new ornaments in its kingdom of wrought and gold. Below the surface, the true scale of the abyss revealed itself. A massive vortex, silent and terrifying, waited to swallow us whole. As the ship descended, the pressure began to sing a song of crushing weight. The iron bolt shrieked, the oak beams groaned, and the air bubbles escaped from our lungs in a final, silver trail. Through the crimson haze, we saw the silhouettes of others, hundreds of ghost ships, a silent fleet of the damned, all circling the same dark center. We were just the latest addition to the ocean's collection. The Morning Star was finally joining her sisters in the cradle of the deep. The ship began to list, not with the violence of a sinking vessel, but with a slow, dignified surrender. The water didn't crash over the rails, it rose like a silent tide, smooth and crimson. We climbed the rigging, higher and higher. As the deck vanished beneath the glowing surface, the Spectral crew didn't flinch. They stood at their posts, water rising to their waists, their translucent eyes fixed on the darkness below. It was a funeral procession for a queen of the sea. The Morning Star was going home, back to the lightless trenches where she was forged in the minds of desperate men. In the heat of the madness, some men still thought of the gold. They ran for the captain's cabin, desperate to fill their pockets before the end. But the gold had changed. The coins in the chest were no longer yellow. They pulsed with a malevolent, emerald fire. As soon as a living hand touched the treasure, the scream that followed wasn't human. The gold was the anchor of the curse, the very thing that kept the Morning Star tethered to the world of the damned. To touch it was to forfeit your soul. We watched as our friends turned to gray ash, their spirits sucked into the glowing hoard. The gold didn't want to be spent, it wanted to be guarded, forever. The storm had passed, but it didn't take the horror with it. It left behind a silence, so heavy it felt like it was crushing the very air out of our lungs. The Morning Star, once the jewel of the Caribbean, was now a floating graveyard. Her proud masts snapped like dry twigs, her sails hanging in tattered ribbons, dripping saltwater like tears. We drifted on a sea of glass, a mirror that reflected only our own despair. There was no wind, no current, just a haunting, unnatural stillness. It was as if the ocean itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to realize that the nightmare hadn't ended, it had only just changed its shape. By the third night, the mist became so thick you could carve it with a cutlass. It wasn't just fog, it was a living shroud. In that gray world, shadows began to move, shadows that didn't belong to the living. You'd see a man at the rail, only to realize his throat had been opened days ago. You'd hear the laughter of the cook who went overboard in the gale. The survivors stopped talking to each other. We were too afraid of whose voice might answer back. Madness isn't a sudden break, it's a slow erosion. We were being unmade, piece by a ship that refused to let its crew rest in peace.